all the speakers have 7 minutes and 20 seconds to deliver their arguments. After 7 minutes and 20, the moderator will not write down on your arguments. So yeah, please do time ourselves too. And yeah, without further ado, I call the Prime Minister. Here.
Okay, am I audible? My preferred method of UI, please through chat box. I will call you if I consider that I have enough time. Wait. I will start my speech in wait, in 3, 2, 1, go. Several characteristics before turning on to my argument. First, we have to understand that Israel, politically leader or General Israel, is badly stubborn. They continuously show their unwillingness to participate in global peace creation. It proven on how Israel had been unlawfully broke the conflict resolutions output. Those are first immediate ceasefire resolutions by UNSC. Second, we throw back in a few decades before, there is resolutions for the conflict exist in Israel and Palestine called two-state solutions. But those resolutions are broken by the Israel. It shows that they are unwilling to participate in global peace. Second of all, we have to understand that our Indonesian stance currently for their international goal or international identity or international political ideology is to ensure that humanitarian tortures we are support the erase of the humanitarian torture in the world. Second, we have to understand also that even though we are not participating politically or military to any blocks, but we as Indonesian have the moral obligations to participate to the and stand for the human rights side itself, and we are still actively contribute to the humanitarian um hu- humanitarian recovery and so on and so forth for people who need it. um in our model at the government, we have to ensure that there is a legit process for us to evacuate those people from Gaza to Indonesia. We would make an agreement with an Israel or charter or any like legal, a legit way to ensure that there is accountability between Indonesia and Israel. Because under the our model to evacuate the Gaza Palestinian itself, we would make the prioritizations people. We are going to prioritize old women, children, and pregnant women because they are the one who are um, need to be prioritized because at the end it is affect the process of civilizations in Palestinian, and I would explain to you later why the civilizations and regenerations is very important in Israel to ensure that they can fulfill the threshold for a country to be called as a legit country. Second of all, we have to understand that our goals is not a mass migrations or a permanent resettlement. We are going to ensure that our process of evacuate is temporary. It is like humanitarian evacuations, and it's possible for the corporations within the country surrounding Gaza, such as Egypt, or we are can be incorporated with international agency and so on and so forth. So it is possible for us to do so. Um, to answer why it is possible, I will answer it later on in my argument. Let's move into the first argument, which is justification. There are two layers. First layer, we are going to help them to recover, not to intervene the process of the conflict through the military or any interventions such as political interventions and so on and so forth. We are going to provide them a proper health facilities for people who injury during the war. We are going to provide them the adequate place for them to build their own civilizations, because when you are let them grow and live in Gaza, it's hard for them to ensure that there is process of regenerations and civilizations there, because even school, even hospital in Gaza are continuously attacked by the Israel people. So it is important for you to provide them an adequate place and safe place to be regenerate in Indonesia, let's say. Please take note that the process is very, very temporary. When they are already in a good situations, they are possible to stand with their self, and we can we can put them back in Gaza itself, because our main aim is not to permanently resettle them in Indonesia. Those in line within our international political ideology, it's clear in our clarifications, pre and active political ideology, and all the process of evacuations is part of the humanitarian aid, not the political or military intervention. So it can reduce the tensions from international concern, because why people are very concerning with any help or interventions that we gave to the Palestinian, because they afraid that the intervention or the aid that we send to them is part of the continuous support in terms of provide them within the weapons, within the materials that can push back the attack from Israel and so on and so forth. That's why Israel continuously block the for all attempts for all the country to send the humanitarian aid, right? Second of all, and second layer, we say that it is in line with the threshold for a country to be called as a legit country. Why? Because we know that simply there are four thresholds. There are territory, sovereign government, recognitions, and the most importantly is there is civilizations. It is important because at the end of the day, Palestine is hardly to be independent if we cannot ensure that there is a continuous civilizations. Because why? It is very problematic in the place where they build the civilizations itself, because even country, hospital, their homes, the shelters itself continuously attacked. So it is important to put them in a safe place so they can regenerate. They can educate the children with a proper ideology so they can support the country when they became an adult individual. Right? So it is very important. At the end of the day, we are going to prove you in later speaker that it is possible to make this agreement itself, because it is part of our capacity. We are open to any help with another country, and Israel is not that have any big tensions on our resolutions itself. Proud to propose.
Okay, thank you, Kanazal, for the speech, and thank you for the opening to the cases of today. No, we're going to jump and open the case coming from the oppositions. I call leader opposition. Time is yours, Ka. You're here.
Okay. First of all, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, Ka.
Okay. So my POI preference is through chat, and I'm going to give response if I think that I have sufficient amount of time to respond. All right, wait, I'm setting up my timer. Okay, so I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, panels, the Palestinian struggles upon their independence from Israel colonization has been running for decades. We understand and we concede that there has been countless amounts of victims. There has been countless amounts of sacrifice, wars, and bloodbaths that have been running only for the Palestinians to get the independence that they have been always dreaming about. In opposition side of the house, we believe that the independence that has been trying to pursue isn't something that is delusional. We believe that Palestinian struggles don't go useless in the current status quo. Lots of status has been acknowledging Palestinian existence much better than it previously was. More international discourse has been taking place for dealing with Palestinian freedom and independence. Even though we think that it takes a lot of cost, we believe that it doesn't go uselessly. More victims may appear in the near future. We concede that, but we believe that Palestine is getting close to independence, something that they have been fighting for. That's to say that in opposition side of the house, we believe that taking them away as a refugee, sending them far away from their homeland is going to be counterproductive, even undermining their long story struggles, even sending away the hope of Palestinians to get independence. I'm going to explain this further in my substantive argument. But first of all, rebuttals, independent rebuttals for the team of government. Most of the government opinion is inherently only talks about the justification level. First of all, I think that this is need to be clarified that this is a policy debate. So that is to say that the analysis should be heavily implied on which policy that's going to create the safety net for all parties, instead of just talking about the feasibility. We think that yes, the policy may be feasible. We are not going to deny that is impossible. We can see that it's very visible to be done and very morally obligatory to be done. But we think that when it comes to policy, it is not something that is affordable in the current status quo. I'm going to explain that further. They say that that it is Indonesians' moral obligation to participate in human rights concern. The question is, even in status quo, we've been participating enough in that kinds of human rights concern. We've been engaging ourselves into a demonstration, voicing out freedom of Palestine. There is an NGO accumulating budget to help them, sending the fresh amount and fresh money to Palestinian, even talking in UN forum. We think that those all efforts that has been undergone by the Indonesia has been enough in terms of showing that we do care with this human rights concern. But moreover, the government side of the house never explained to us why then that moral obligation that they are so glorifying about should be intertwined through the policy that is economically harmful, I'm going to explain this, and can be devastating to the society. That's to say that in opposition side of the house, we don't try to be utopic hero and talking about how we expect the war is over. We can see that it's not possible for the current status quo. We can see that the war is devastating, but we think that the war is going to be positively in the eyes of Palestine. So 2 points of argument that I'm going to talk about. First argument, why morally this is backlashing the core struggles that Palestinians have been undergoing, independence. Ladies and gentlemen, Palestinians have been standing as a self-claimed independent state for decades, and they keep doing tons of maneuver to get themselves acknowledged as independent states in global community and getting the right as independent states. So acknowledgement from international forum is something that they have been crying for a very long time. Moreover, in the past scenario, U.S. maneuver and alliances of U.S. towards the Israel hampers these kinds of effort that has been undergone by the Palestinian. This person making many U.S. alliance countries feel reluctant to give such recognition. We think that the immense and very intense battle between the two states for these couples of years eventually resulted to two unprecedented positive things. Number one, international society, in more particularly Western countries, start realizing that the importance of giving independence to Palestine in a way that they participate in demonstrating free Palestinian movement and even urging their government to give the support for Palestine. This is something that has never been happening. But moreover, the previously negating countries such as France or Germany start giving their support for Palestine. So conclusively, even if it takes a lot of victims and sacrifices, there is a progress and they are getting closer to independence. And to keep the progress going, Palestinians have to keep fighting by staying there, ladies and gentlemen. That's to say that in opposition, we believe that taking them away from their homeland is going to be detrimental towards the struggle because it means two things. Number one, if you are moving Palestinians away from their hometown, Palestinians as well as Indonesia can be translated as acknowledging that Palestinians have lost the battle. Besides, the physical existence of war victims there are also something that is very important to gain international attention and raising the awareness upon the urgency for the independence. Imagine, if you don't see the victims over there, you are not going to believe that the issue are that severe from the very first place. We think that sending them away from their homeland, nullifying them from the media, for example, or pretending that everything has been settled is going to nullify the catastrophic conditions there. And sooner, we think that the attention is going to fade away as well. See, for example, how the catastrophic coups in Myanmar, for example, happening to Rohingya are not getting that much of attention, regardless of the numbers of the victims. Because from the very first place, international attention doesn't realize the extent of the issue due to the fact that the victims has been spreading sporadically. But moreover, we think that taking them away from their homeland is going to make more space for Israel to even further dominating and colonizing the land. Because the ultimate reason why Palestine is because it is resided by the Palestinian. So furthermore, this is kind of heartless, but factual eventually. It can tone down the militants and fighting spirits of Palestinian jihadists. This is most likely to happen because one thing that triggers the spirit is the intention to protect your loved ones. That is to say that for all those reasons, physically, the Palestinians has to be there. So that, to conclude this argument, we think that sending Palestinians away from their homeland is going to be counterproductive with the intention to be granted independence. Second point of argument, how we think that practically Indonesia's current condition isn't ready for doing this costly policy. So this is what you are going, as context, this is what you are going to do if you are talking the ballots of being a shelter for refugees, even if opposition say it is only temporary. The government has to provide space for life. Government has to provide accessible basic necessity, for example, like food, as well as clean water. The government has to provide basic healthcare. This is all cost lots of budget from the start. In conclusion, it takes a massive amount of budget to go perfectly, and doing it improperly is to go perfectly to this kind of policy, and doing it improperly is only going to attract international scrutiny and bad prejudices for Indonesia. Let's then start this argument by seeing again how bad current Indonesian's economic conditions. Not only get lots of domestic issues like inflation or downgraded index of stock market, but it also has to deal with US tariffs, for example, that makes it even harder for Indonesia to get the economic resilience. We think we can never undergo this shelter making program under some scenarios. Number one, Prabowo's underlying program that has to be over everything is makan bergizi gratis that gets superly massive amount of budget to the extent it cuts budget allocation for other vital programs, including but not limited to security, healthcare, education. So for this purpose, it is going to still acceptable. We think that because this has taken a lot of amount of budget, so Indonesia's current economic condition has not been ready for another kind of policy that is going to even cost more of budget. We think that makan bergizi gratis should always be prioritized because this is exactly what makes Prabowo being elected, because this is what Indonesians are expecting. So the reason why people vote for Prabowo is because they think that makan bergizi gratis is something that's very important that has to be prioritized. We think that doing this another kind of policy is going to harm this kind of superior policy that has to be glorified from the very first beginning. I think that moreover, the longer cases of economic conditions is going to be further explained in my second speaker. Vote for opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Fajrin, for the debate. To continue the debate and continue the issue from the government teams, I call Deputy Prime Minister here.
Okay, am I audible? Okay, I would like to start in my argument, but before that, if any of you wanted to POI, just to make sure, just raise your hand first so that I would notice your so I would prefer that instead of speaking out loud. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, I would start off with rebuttaling of most of the arguments that team opposition has already pointed out. One of them is that taking them away from their home will counter the possibility to be independent in the first place. You mentioned that independency is very close, but I don't see them being independent for the last 50 or 60 years. So therefore, this isn't possible for them to independence. But even then, if we're taking them away from their home, doesn't necessarily counter their productivity, because we're basically focusing on prioritizing women and children to minimize Indonesia's capability as well. So that's what we're going to discuss in later so on. But secondly, you also team opposition also mentioned that we're not focusing to take the soldiers. Team opposition also fails to realize that we're not taking soldiers. We're only providing a safe haven for women and children. Instead, for those who are unable to be productive, who are unable to be productive in the war, So basically, this relevancy isn't to be found in the team opposition. Moreover, I would also like to point out that even if the moral obligation Indonesia isn't capable of doing that, the point is that we're not focusing on short temporary moments. We're focusing and proposing on long-term agreements between the Middle East and also with Indonesia instead. So basically, what we're trying to do is to make them see that that Gaza is basically being torn off. It's basically being pressured by Israel. And what about the question of Israel instead? Israel always crawled back to the U.S. Basically, you're confirming them that Israel has already lost the war, but I don't see them being backed down from Gaza anytime soon. So therefore, there is no really relevancy on your argument from the team opposition's argument in the first place. Other than that, team opposition also said that Palestine would acknowledge their losses simultaneously. One of the reasons is that when you say that it isn't important to save, are you saying that it isn't important to save these people from ever been resisting for the last 50 or 60 decades? Gaza has been at war for decades. So therefore, the relevancy is not acknowledging if Gaza has already backed down from the war. It's basically you're trying to say that Gaza isn't ready for the war. So basically, that is not capable on our argument just yet. But the topic about Indonesia isn't being ready about being a being a safe haven for the Gaza citizens. You also lose the point out that there are more countries that are eyeing on Gaza at this moment. Asian countries such as Malaysia and other countries are focusing also to support Palestine in whatever they can. So basically, if we ever to compose international funding, this would also help the situation that Indonesia isn't being ready for. So basically, you also said that the U.S. economic intervention wouldn't be realized if Indonesia had ever intervened in the first place. But who says But who says Indonesia has been interfering? We're not interfering. We're just trying to say we're saving the children and the women because they're not capable of holding a gun. Moreover, they're trying to stay alive. So that is all to close down what a team opposition fails to realize. My assertion is to being a temporary. Although team opposition has already pointed out, being temporary isn't the key word here. So basically, I'm going to point out to three arguments instead. So first of all, with minimalizing refugees, such as prioritizing women and children and medical specialized citizens, this could also prioritize Indonesia's capability to simultaneously help within Indonesia, while also to provide medical attention to the refugees instead. So basically, we're minimizing overcrowding and media framing instead. And what if the international fund doesn't happen? International fund has already happened in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. So if Indonesia has the initiative to make a forward case on Gaza, to take a refugee on Gaza, therefore, other countries such as Iran or Middle East, or even the countries that have already been sided with Gaza in the first place, would also be considered to provide for Indonesia's plan to take care of the refugees. Therefore, it could also be advertised to protect the women and children, whilst also trying to say that Gaza has nothing to do with the war in the first place. So we're trying to say that being refugee, to keep the refugees, aren't necessarily intervening with the war, but we're basically trying to save the people that are being held at gunpoint. Finally, I also wanted to point out that we should also reconsider public opinion. First of all, of course, team opposition might say that what if Rohingya in the past? Rohingya has been running around recklessly trying to do whatever they want in Indonesia, but that's not the case. You must differentiate the difference of refugee with Gaza and Rohingya. And before Rohingya's case, in Rohingya's case, they were considered as a problem because there were no government plans to oversee them in the first place. They were just going into Indonesia as an immigrant. This is why Indonesia is basically overseeing this whole refugee plan, only to be able to be politically correct with being politically correct with other countries that are involved in this war. So therefore, with even to consider this public opinion, we could also emphasize that people in Gaza has already differentiated with Rohingya, and also this wouldn't be happen in the first place, even if so, worst case scenario, politically, Indonesia would be overseas as a threat to Israel. But this could be answered, ladies and gentlemen. But having a signed treaty within Indonesia and Israel that we're not doing an intervention, we're doing so that we could save the women and children instead, and not teaching them how to pick up the gun. Best case scenario, God belongs to us because Indonesia's long-term achieve political sovereignty, and not just among the Middle East, but also within the countries that focuses on or sided with Gaza. Likelihood that Prabowo's plan might shock the world, but also being the first step to initiatively helping Gaza to declare independence in the first place. So therefore, we're trying to save the women to stabilize their citizenship. And also, we're trying to focus on to help the war, whilst not trying to intervene in the first place. Indonesia can be benefited in a ways that could potentially pushes Indonesia to better future, whilst also to look on favorably. Therefore, thus the team government probably.
Okay, thank you, Faisal, for the speech. To continue the debate, I call the deputy leader of opposition. Here.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, my POI preference is just simply write on chat box how said that Prabowo's plan to evacuate Gaza's victim to reallocating them elsewhere. Before I jump into my contributions, I would like to depict Indonesia's current conditions that make this plan is inefficient. First, economically, Indonesia is also struggling. That already stretch Indonesia's capacities to the limit.
Sorry, Chantika, but your voice is kind of lagging. So yeah, maybe if your connection is not really bad, you can like turn off your camera. Hope it will help you join the voices.
Okay, am I audible right now?
Yes,
Sorry, guys.
you're. Can you just start from the beginning?
Okay, my POI preference is just simply clear it. Write it down in chat box, guys. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The government side of this house said that Prabowo's plan to evacuate Gaza's victim to Indonesia appears as a form of humanitarian responsibility or a humanitarian gesture, but we believe that harm than good. As my previous speaker has mentioned before, that true solidarity means empowering Palestinians to remain and resist in their homeland, not reallocating them elsewhere. Before I jump into my contributions, I would like to depict Indonesia's current conditions that make this plan is inefficient. First, economically, Indonesia is also struggling to handle the prosperity of its people. But since there are lots of issues happening in Indonesia, like the refugees that already living in a difficult the existing refugee situation already stretched Indonesia capacities to the limit, and adding more displaced people without adequate resources, without proper planning and further consideration, would risk worsening humanitarian conditions for all involved. Second, budget efficiency policy that was implemented by Prabowo also has a direct impact to this plan. Why? Because evacuating war funds for Indonesia's current conditions. If Prabowo focuses more attention and resources on evacuating Gaza's victim to Indonesia, there is a higher chance of public protest because many Indonesians feel that domestic needs should come first. When the government cuts its budget efficiency to allocate such as Gaza refugees, it can create dissatisfaction among the local population. People may see this as the government prioritizing foreign issues over urgent problem at home like poverty, health healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Moving into my argument first, why in our side evacuating is not the best solution? We believe that it is clear that Indonesia has always maintained a strong and supportive stance toward Palestine for many years because Indonesia has consistently provided humanitarian aid to Palestinians in various forms like food, medicine, and even shelter. So this aid reflects Indonesia's deep commitment to the Palestinian people and their struggle. For example, in recent months, Indonesia has sent numerous consignment of essential supplies to Gaza, such as tens of thousands of food boxes and medical assistance. However, the government side of this house may assume that these forms of help are not enough. Few reason why we believe that these efforts are already enough. First, Indonesia's aid have been well targeted and delivered directly to those in need through trusted local and regional partners. This means the help actually reaches the most vulnerable people quickly and efficiently. Second, besides giving aid, Indonesia also speaks up for Palestine in international meetings, which means this help pressure other countries to respect Palestinian rights and work for peace. Then, what does this efforts prove to us? It proves that Indonesia efforts are already enough and Indonesia for a much complicated solutions that will only burden to Indonesia, especially evacuate Gaza's victim to Indonesia. This effort already reflect that Indonesia is not showing indifference to Palestinians, but in our side, having victims to be evacuated to Indonesia are more likely to make even worse conditions. Second, why does this plan only worsen conditions for Indonesia? We'll know that there is inconsistency of Prabowo's policy. Prabowo has stated that this evacuation is only for 1,000 victims because promise that Prabowo will the genocide that is endless leads to the lack of clarity since the war's end is uncertain. The evacuation could become a continuous process. This concern about whether Indonesia will eventually have to accommodate a much larger number of Palestinians, which could strain resources and complicate situations for Indonesia. Then, how this plan also worsens Indonesia's condition economically. Since Indonesia already had bad economic condition, which is the increasing tariff from the United States, burdening Indonesia economically, right? If Indonesia accept Palestinian victims enemies automatically between Indonesia and the United States, since the United States has already imposed high tariff on Indonesia export, and by the U.S. as supporting its enemies might increase negative statement. This could lead to the United States to raise tariff even further on Indonesia goods, right? Okay, moving into my second argument. Why does this plan also worsen condition not only for Indonesian but also to all Palestinians? When there are fewer civilians left in Gaza due to evacuation or forced displacement, Israel can use this situation as a justification to escalate its military operations with fewer concern about civilian casualties. The argument might be framed as, "Oh, we are not attacking civilians because most of them have already been evacuated." This narrative can serve as a powerful tool for Israel to legitimize their further military action and territorial expansion, and this tactic effectively manipulates the perception of the conflict. It suggests that Palestinians have willingly left their homes and are therefore agree or willing to lose their lands, when in reality, many are forced out by violence, destruction of infrastructure, and untenable living conditions. If Indonesia participate in relocating even vulnerable Palestinians from Gaza, it risks normalizing the idea that evacuation is an acceptable or even preferred solution to the crisis. Over time, this normalization can weaken the fundamental argument that Palestinians have an inherent right to remain on their land. When people are physically removed, even temporarily, it creates a dangerous precedent that the population is part of managing the conflict rather than addressing its root causes. This process can unintendedly support Israel's narrative that Gaza is now empty or uninhabitable, which Israel may use to justify further territorial claims or their military actions. Okay, why evacuating war victims means in our side, we also believe that evacuating war victims means we need a capable source to heal them, because they are more likely have traumas. Because victims are more likely have traumas that should be treated properly. The question is, does Indonesia really have those abilities? Because we see in status quo, refugees. Because we see in status quo in Indonesia, refugees are treated treated so badly by the local people, which means this also can happen to the Palestinians, not only by its people, but also by the government. Indonesian government doesn't really pay their attention to the refugees because, in fact, most of refugees have no proper education, or even most of them has no education because they can only rely to NGO who voluntarily help them. Why this can happen, and how can these things happen in Indonesia? Because Indonesia doesn't ratify Refugees Convention, which leads to the condition where refugees faces more difficult situation than ever. Proves that reallocating victims doesn't mean it is a better way, since there is no ratification for refugees in Indonesia, and they are more likely cannot get a basic rights which they need. And that is why we are very much proud to vote oppose. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thank you for the Shantika. To continue the debate. Okay, to continue the debate and close the arguments close all the cases coming from the government teams, I call government whip. Here.
Okay, am I audible? Okay. My POI preference, just raise your hand and yeah, I'll call out your name and just unmute yourself. Several seconds for me to actually put my speech. Okay, thank you, Kanazal. Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The urgency of the situations that we have right now is people, literally hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in Gaza by Israel, by the SDF as an example, right? And peoples that are going to suffer is like children, is elderly, is like people are who are unproductive, and women who are pregnant. Those are the things that have been characterized by our first speaker, was literally said that people like this is going to be sustaining a country so that that country is going to be recognized by the whole world, right? So there are four things that we have to actually recognize. One of the things is that it is going to be sustainable. Uh, we have to agree that we have to help Palestine to be sustainable so that they can be a country in the future. So opposing that means that you support ethnic cleansing, which you support peoples in Palestine to die, and yeah, sending humanitarian aid will not help anyway. Okay. I think our mechanization is clear, is that we're going to take those unproductive people who cannot help in war, that can sustain those country in recent years, go back to our country to regenerate themselves, and as soon as it's safe, as soon as it's going to be not there's no going to be war and whatsoever, we're going to make them take them back into their country, right? So the questions is that the feasibility of this is happening and international support, right? The opposition side of the house argued that the Palestine is going to closely have their independence, and I think we're not. I think that's wrong because the US actually have literally have presidents that are populist, that are so radical, that are going to support Israel, right? That is the thing that we're going to be facing in the future. So Donald Trump will actually support Israel to move peoples and actually obtain that land, right? So Indonesia's plan is actually going to support Palestine to gain the land, right? What if it is not in line with the interests of the Gaza citizens itself? I think it was in line because so many, as an example, Kanazal said, hospitals are being destroyed by justifying that okay, it was defense to menyeludupi senjata as an example in the hospitals, right? It is something that Israel always do to justify to bombing the hospitals, right? So the most important thing that you have to do right now is actually take those vulnerable people into another country, right? Not leave them there, uh, vulnerable in hospitals that are being justified anyway by the Israels to actually destroy your land, right? The second thing, they said that international ascensions, international meetings and agreements is fair enough. We say that it is not because actions implies more than that, right? The matter of that is America has veto rights in UN. You're not going to pass down any Israel or Palestine's uh, agreement there, right? Because they have those veto rights. So the right things to do right now is actually taking real actions to help them, right? As an example, Nazal said that we're going to take them into our country and regenerate them and take them back into their country, right? Because the UNRC is ineffective as an organization, as an international organization, to actually make an agreement that can affect those wars, right? So all of the argument of the opposition side about those kind of discussions is not going to be feasible anyway, right? Actions speaks more than what you're going to do. But why is it they argue that it's morally bad and it's not in line with Indonesia anyway? We already told you that Indonesia is in this background. The background of Indonesia is from a people suffering of a regime that are hundreds of years being oppressed, right? So those things are in line with Palestine, right? People there are suffering because the regime are going to overthrow them. Not even overthrow them, but cleaning their ethnicity out of the existence, right? So we as a in Indonesian country, our principle is still the same. Is still going to be helping those humanitarian rights of them to actually give them the right amount of opportunity to actually give birth to their child as an example, give them education as an example, that cannot be retained on their side of the house, that cannot be retained on opposition side of the house because they face bombing every day, they face bullets every day in their life, right? So next classes then about the economic feasibility. We think that Indonesia the economic feasibility. We think that, yeah, you said that domestic come first, but we think that majority of the people in Indonesia is already majority of people in Indonesia is already supporting Palestine. So they're probably going to be supporting, not backlashing all of this, not backlashing this policy. Because, yeah, as an example, maybe the actions of boycott have shown you that we really, really want to uh, being in their side, right? So it's likely going to be acceptable, and there's going to be a supportive matter from Indonesian citizen anyway. But okay, even if like Indonesia doesn't have those costly money, there's international organizations, because international organizations cannot go through Palestine, Palestine and Israel uh, in real time because there's USA, but we international organizations such as UNHRC can help them through Indonesia as an example because they don't have limit like maybe Israel there, right? So they probably going to Indone help Indonesia in humanitarian aid. They're probably going to help Indonesia in money as an example to provide educations and to provide healthcare for the citizen because they cannot get it when they're in their country. Yeah, I think that's my cases. Thank you.
Okay, Shi, thank you for the case. So now, to close all the debate and continue the cases coming from the opposition team, I call opposition whip. Here, here.
Thank you, Kaura. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Uh, I'll start my speech. Hello? Yeah, okay. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Supporting Prabowo's plan on evacuating people in Gaza, making them refugees in Indonesia, is the same as supporting the ethnic cleansing that is happening right now in Palestine. As we are supporting the occupier in Gaza to take control of their land that they have lived in for a millennia by letting them here and by not supporting them in their own mainland where they are supposed to fight. The debate have been going on how it is such a sign of support to Palestine for letting them being evacuated here in Indonesia, and how the argument coming from government that helping them it is such a tangible form of solidarity uh, for the Palestinian. Now, panels, the opposition team have proven how by not evacuating Gaza victims to Indonesia will still show form of solidarity, and how we need to see this decision program in the shoes of the Indonesian people itself, just like my previous speaker have explained. How that aside from how this Gaza victim doesn't actually need the evacuation to begin with, and have better alternative like uh, my previous speaker have said, like example sending aids instead. This program is not in our main priority list. If it is not urgent, if we were to compare to our condition right now, our condition as a developing country in the midst of a new presidential management chaos, which the government team haven't really responded very late into the debate, right? Because panels understand for any program of a country, every program a country want to run, whether it's this evacuating victim program or makan siang gratis, that country has to have the capacity to do so, and the government teams fail to prove that Indonesia is in fact capable. No, thank you. So before that, I will do some rebuttals first about they said the refugee is not permanent and they will come back eventually, and how the people that they're bringing to Indonesia here is the one who cannot fight. So panels, this is less likely. The war have been going on for ages and it have never gotten any better. There's no likelihood on why the occupier would stop attacking Gaza even when it's empty, because the people are being evacuated somewhere else. Even if they did come back home, they will not be safe at the end of the day, as Gaza will most likely being occupied by Israel at the end of the day, contradicting with the whole purpose of the evacuation plan, which is to give them safety. And yes, even if the refugee that we're putting here is like the one that cannot fight, these people will still have to face all of the problem that's happening right now in Indonesia, starting from the overpopulation, all of the budget cuts in Indonesia. Next is about how government team is proposing about regenerating in Palestine in Indonesia. We don't think it's morally okay, and we don't think this is Indonesia have the place to be the one who's managing regeneration for Palestinian people. Their homeland should be the place that they learn by their own people to keeping the authenticity of their culture, right? Our place in this conflict is panels is to provide support not to regenerate a whole generation of Palestinian that even the government cannot prove whether or not this country can manage to do it. Lastly, about how they say that sending aids is not enough, and how about the condition of the people there, right? Panels, we don't see this as a problem. Indonesia is not the only country that's supporting Palestine. There are a lot of humanitarian aids, and they're from other country, and many humanitarian organization and NGO that is actively providing Palestinian safety. And also for the concern coming from Gulf about the safety of Palestinians there, if we leave them there are so many humanitarian law that the Israel needs to follow, so to protect the people there, for like example the children, the mothers, and the elderly. So that is it for my rebuttals. Going into my clashes about whether this is in line with the interests of the Indonesian people, right? Panels, to know whether this is in line or not, we need to see that the status quo right now. The BOP that the government team fails to answer is that can Indonesia manage to juggle between providing the refugee of Gaza and the Indonesian people without having to sacrificing one, right? Right now, Indonesia is experiencing extreme budget efficiency, mass layoff, and stagnant wages. How is this so bad, and why are these changes actively affecting people in Indonesia? If Indonesia
POI.
people have to be
be the victim of efficiency because of the evacuation program that clearly needs money for sending the Palestinian people here, need money for housing and shelter, for them to stay in, and constant food and medication supplies. This money doesn't come from a vacuum panels. This come from taxes money, budget cutting money, and could possibly just added to the government debt at the that will
POI.
result in at the end of the residency, right? Taking money from other what the government do is they will take money from like important fundamental sector that Indonesia need to improve. For like example, money for infrastructure improvement in rural areas will be cut off. Public service institution worker will struggle with being paid. Some of them even have to be laid off because their company cannot no longer pay them. Infrastructure abandonment, like IKN, for example, will be stopped because and that will result with there will worker will lose their job because the project have been stopped. And lastly, education budget will also be put off, right? Seeing so many things on our plates right now confirms how Indonesia is not suitable to host an evacuation camp and have far more important agenda to be solved at the end of the day. So lastly, how it is the debate going whether this program is also in line with the interests of the Palestinian panels. The war between Palestine and Israel have been going for decades. The promise that government team keep bringing is that this victim will eventually be sent back. Now, how is this impossible? To want for Gaza people to be safe, there's either Palestinian want their land back or Israel have fully conquered the land. Two scenario for this, and if the Palestinian did win, it will take time. It will less likely for it to be fast because considering how powerful Israel will be, right? And that will be leaving the refugee to stay independently in Indonesia. That will result in victim needs to cling on the limited resources in Indonesia. Considering the budget cut happening in Indonesia will struggle to provide for the victim. And even if they did, they will use efficiency budget, for example, that will impact the people in Indonesia, and this will lead to complaint coming from the Indonesian people itself. And even if the the scenario of Israel success of occupying Gaza, the people in Gaza will come home to face a government that actively preached to erasing their people. Thus, he believed that it's less likely for this victim to go home, and the best possible outcome is for us to support Palestinian by giving them the alternative. And the main interest for the Palestinian people is to keeping their land panels. Proto oppose. Thank you.